He had built an empire worth over $200 million, but nothing in his world prepared him for the moment he saw her sitting on a cold sidewalk, holding two children and asking strangers for spare change. Daniel Brooks had just stepped out of his black SUV on a quiet Manhattan street, adjusting his tailored coat as the winter air cut through the city, his assistant talking beside him about a meeting worth another 7 figures. But then everything blurred because just a few feet away, near a flickering street lamp, sat a woman in worn clothes, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled her children closer to keep them warm. And for a split second, Daniel almost looked away like everyone else did, almost continued walking like he always had, until something about her stopped him completely. People walk past thousands of faces every day, but sometimes one face can bring your entire past crashing back in a single heartbeat. That was when the world seemed to freeze around him, because the woman slowly lifted her head, and even beneath the exhaustion, beneath the years that had clearly not been kind, Daniel recognized her. Sophia Bennett. The name echoed in his mind like something he had buried long ago, something he had convinced himself no longer mattered. Yet there she was, real, fragile, and impossibly changed. His chest tightened as memories flooded in, uninvited memories of laughter, of late-night conversations, of a version of life that felt so far removed from the man he had become. This couldn't be real, he thought, because Sophia was supposed to be gone. Not like this, not sitting on the pavement in 30-degree weather with 2 small children clinging to her, their tiny hands gripping her coat, as if she was the only safe place they had left in the world. Daniel's heartbeat slowed and then raced all at once as he stood frozen, watching her carefully, searching for any sign that he was wrong, that this was just someone who looked like her. But then one of the children shifted slightly, revealing a familiar shade of hair, a familiar curve in the face, something that felt disturbingly close to recognition. And suddenly, the question hit him harder than anything else ever had. How did the woman he once loved end up here? And why did those children feel like a part of a story he was never told? His assistant kept talking, unaware that Daniel had stopped listening minutes ago, unaware that in that moment, the deal, the money, the entire life Daniel had built meant absolutely nothing compared to the mystery unfolding just a few steps away. Daniel swallowed hard, his breath visible in the cold air, as he took one slow step forward, then another, unable to pull himself away, even if he wanted to, because something deep inside him, something he had ignored for years, was now demanding answers. And as Sophia lowered her gaze again, clearly trying to avoid attention, Daniel realized one thing with chilling certainty. This was not a coincidence. This was a moment that was about to change everything he thought he knew about his past, his success, and the life he had left behind. Daniel stopped just a few steps away, close enough now to hear the faint sound of the younger child coughing softly into Sophia's shoulder, and something about that small, fragile sound made his chest tighten in a way he could not explain, because this was no longer just a memory standing in front of him. This was real, painfully real, and yet Sophia still had not looked up again, as if she had trained herself to disappear in plain sight, to become invisible to people like him, people who walked past without ever seeing. But Daniel could see her, he could not see her, and the longer he stood there, the heavier everything felt, as if time itself was waiting for him to do something. He glanced around briefly, noticing how others passed by without slowing down, some avoiding eye contact, others pretending not to notice. And for a moment, Daniel realized that just seconds ago, he would have been one of them, just another man too busy to care. But now that illusion had shattered completely. He took another step closer, his polished shoes now inches from the edge of the worn blanket Sophia had laid out on the sidewalk. And that was when one of the children looked up at him, wide eyes filled with a quiet curiosity that felt far too mature for such a young face. And Daniel felt something shift deep inside him, something unfamiliar, something that did not belong to the controlled, calculated life he had built. The child's gaze lingered for a second, longer than expected, and Daniel noticed the detail that made his breath catch slightly, the same deep blue eyes he saw every morning in the mirror. He quickly looked away, trying to steady himself, trying to convince himself that he was imagining things, that coincidence could explain it. But the thought refused to leave. How was that even possible? His mind raced, searching for logic, for distance, for anything that would put space between him and the question forming in his head. But before he could stop himself, he spoke, his voice lower than usual, almost uncertain. Sophia. The name slipped out before he could take it back, and the moment it did, everything changed. Sophia froze, her hands tightening instinctively around the children as if protecting them from something unseen, and slowly, almost reluctantly, she lifted her head again, her eyes meeting his, and this time there was no doubt left, no room for denial, because recognition hit both of them at once, sharp and undeniable. For a brief second, neither of them said anything. The noise of the city fading into the background as if the world itself had stepped aside for this moment, and Daniel saw it clearly now, not just the exhaustion on her face, but the strength underneath it, the same quiet strength he had always admired, now hardened by something he could not yet understand. Sophia's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out, and instead, she quickly looked down again, trying to pull the children closer, trying to retreat back into the safety of anonymity. But it was too late for that. Daniel felt a mix of emotions he had not experienced in years: confusion, regret, anger, and something else he was not ready to name, all colliding at once as he stood there, realizing that whatever story he had told himself about the past, whatever version of events he had accepted to move forward, was no longer enough, because Sophia Bennett was not just a memory anymore. She was right here in front of him, and the life she was living did not make sense, not with the woman he once knew, not with the questions that were now impossible to ignore. And as the cold wind swept through the street again, Daniel understood one thing with growing certainty. He was not walking away from this. Not this time. The silence between them stretched just long enough to become unbearable, and Daniel realized that the next words spoken would change everything. Yet Sophia was already trying to end the moment before it could begin, her eyes lowering again as she adjusted the thin blanket around the children, as if that small motion could somehow shield them from him, from the past, from whatever truth was threatening to surface. Daniel felt a sudden urgency rise in his chest, because he had seen that look before, years ago, the same quiet withdrawal, the same instinct to carry everything alone. And he knew if he let her disappear now, he might lose the chance to understand forever. Sophia, wait, he said, his voice firmer this time. Not loud, but impossible to ignore, and she froze again, her shoulders tightening as if bracing for something she had already decided she did not want to face. Slowly, she turned back toward him, and this time there was something different in her expression. Not just recognition, but hesitation, fear, and something deeper that Daniel could not yet name. "You should not be here," she said quietly, her voice softer than he remembered, but still carrying that same calm steadiness that once grounded him, and the words struck him harder than he expected, because they were not just about the street or the moment, they were about distance, about a line she had already drawn between their worlds. Daniel shook his head slightly, trying to process the weight behind such a simple sentence. "I could say the same thing to you," he replied, his gaze shifting briefly to the children before returning to her, searching for answers in her face. But Sophia did not follow his eyes. She kept hers fixed downward, as if even a glance could reveal too much. The older child moved closer to her side, instinctively sensing the tension, and Daniel noticed again the details that refused to leave his mind. The familiar features, the quiet awareness in the child's expression, and with every passing second, the question inside him grew louder. Sophia must have sensed it too, because she tightened her hold slightly and said, almost too quickly, "They're tired. We should go." But she did not move, and Daniel understood that she could not without facing him at least once more. "Go where, Sophia?" he asked, and this time there was no edge in his voice, only concern, real and unfiltered, the kind he had not allowed himself to feel in years, and that seemed to break something in her composure. just for a moment, because her eyes finally met his fully. And in that brief connection, Daniel saw everything she was trying to hide: the exhaustion, the resilience, the weight of choices made alone. "It does not matter," she said, but clearly did, and they both knew it. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair as he struggled to reconcile the woman in front of him with the one he had known, because nothing about this situation aligned with the past he remembered. Not her strength, not her independence, not the way she had once walked away without looking back. "You disappeared," he said, the words coming out before he could filter them, and Sophia flinched almost imperceptibly, a reaction so small that anyone else might have missed it, but Daniel did not, and in that moment, he realized something that unsettled him deeply. Whatever story he had believed about her leaving, it was incomplete, and whatever truth she was carrying now, she had been carrying it alone for a very long time. The air between them felt heavier with every passing second, as if the past was pressing in from all sides, demanding to be acknowledged. And Sophia's silence only made it louder. Daniel's words still hung there, sharp and unresolved, and for a moment, it seemed like she might turn away again, like she had years ago, leaving him with nothing but questions. But this time, something shifted, something small but undeniable, because instead of retreating, she stayed. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the blanket, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a quiet weight that stopped him from interrupting. "You think I disappeared," she said, not as a question, but as a reflection of the version of events he had clearly held on to. And Daniel felt a flicker of frustration rise, not at her, but at the distance between what he believed and what she was implying. "You did," he answered, more firmly than before, because that part at least had always felt certain to him. She was there one day and gone the next, without explanation, without a goodbye that made sense, without anything he could hold on to. Sophia's gaze dropped briefly to the children, who were now leaning quietly against her, their small forms seeking warmth and reassurance. And Daniel noticed how instinctively she adjusted her coat around them, how every movement was focused on keeping them safe, and something about that made it harder for him to hold onto his anger. "That is what it looked like," she said softly, and those few words landed differently than anything else she had said so far, because they carried the weight of something unfinished, something complicated. Daniel frowned slightly, his mind trying to catch up. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice lowering again, not demanding, but searching. Sophia hesitated, and for a brief moment, Daniel could see the internal struggle in her eyes, the decision of how much to say, how much to keep hidden, and it reminded him of who she had always been, someone who carried more than she ever showed. "It means you only saw the part one, allowed you to see," she replied, and Daniel felt that sentence settle deep, because it challenged everything he thought he understood about their past. The city noise continued around them, cars passing, footsteps echoing, but none of it seemed to matter anymore, because the space between them had become its own world, one where the truth was slowly beginning to surface. Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself, because this was no longer just about seeing her again. This was about realizing that the story he had built his life on might not have been the truth at all. His gaze shifted once more to the children, and this time he did not look away quickly. He let himself see them fully, the way the older one watched him carefully, as if trying to understand who he was, the way the younger one rested quietly against Sophia, trusting her completely, and with that, the question returned stronger than before. "Impossible to ignore. Sophia," he said again, more gently now. "How long have you been on your own?" And this time, she did not deflect immediately. She did not look away. Instead, she met his eyes with a steadiness that felt both familiar and distant at the same time. "Long enough to stop expecting anyone to come back," she answered, and something in Daniel's chest tightened at those words, because whether she meant it or not, they carried an accusation, one that he was not sure how to respond to. He took a small step closer, careful not to startle her or the children, and lowered his voice. "I never knew where you went," he said, and for the first time since he had spoken her name, there was no doubt in his tone, only honesty. Sophia studied him for a moment, as if weighing whether to believe that, whether to trust anything he said. And then, almost imperceptibly, her expression softened. Not completely, but enough to reveal that there was more to the story than either of them had ever faced. And in that moment, Daniel realized something that changed the way he saw everything. Sophia had not just been surviving all these years. She had been protecting something, and whatever that something was, it was standing right beside her, holding on to her, looking at him with eyes that felt far too familiar to be ignored. Daniel felt the weight of her last words settle deep in his chest, but before he could respond, the older child shifted closer, looking up at him again with that same steady gaze. And this time, the child spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Mom, who is he?" And the question landed like a spark in an already fragile moment. Sophia immediately tensed, her hand gently brushing the child's shoulder as if to calm him. But her eyes flickered toward Daniel in a way that revealed everything she was trying not to say. Daniel's breath caught, because there it was, the moment he'd been circling without fully stepping into. And now it was standing right in front of him, unavoidable. "Sophia," he said slowly, his voice lower, more serious than before. "What are you not telling me?" And this time, there was no room left for deflection, no space for vague answers, because the truth was already pressing in from all sides. Sophia closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering the strength to hold herself together, and when she opened them again, there was something different there. Not fear, not hesitation, but a quiet resolve that made Daniel's chest tighten. "I did not want you to find out like this," she said. And those words alone were enough to shift the entire moment into something heavier, something irreversible. Daniel's mind raced, trying to connect the fragments, the years, the silence, the children, and then it hit him. Not as a clear thought, but as a realization he almost did not want to accept. "Are they mine?" he asked, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. And the air seemed to freeze again as Sophia looked at him, really looked at him this time, and did not answer immediately. That silence was louder than anything else, because it carried the truth without needing to say it, and Daniel felt the ground beneath everything he believed begin to shift. The younger child stirred slightly, resting her head against Sophia, and Daniel's eyes softened despite himself, because suddenly this was no longer just about the past. It was about something living, something real, something that had existed all this time without him. Sophia finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion she was clearly holding back. "I was going to tell you," she said, "but things changed faster than I could handle." And Daniel shook his head slightly, overwhelmed. "You had years, Sophia," he replied, not accusing, but unable to hide the weight of what he felt. And that was when the second wave of truth hit harder than the first. Sophia's expression shifted again, and she said quietly, "I try to find you." And those words stopped him completely, because they did not fit into the story he had told himself at all. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper now. And Sophia's gaze dropped, for a moment before returning to him. "I went to your office, Daniel, more than once," she said, "but they told me you had moved on, that you did not want to be found." And Daniel felt a sharp disbelief rise, because that was impossible. He had never given such instructions, never even known she was looking. "That is not true," he said immediately, the certainty in his voice cutting through the cold air. And for the first time, both of them seemed to realize that something far bigger than distance or choice had separated them. The realization settled in slowly but powerfully, like pieces of a puzzle finally beginning to align, and Daniel understood now that this was not just about mischances. It was about something that had been kept from both of them, something that had shaped the last several years of their lives without their knowledge. He looked at the children again, really looked this time, and the truth no longer felt like a question. It felt like something undeniable, something that changed everything in an instant. And as he met Sophia's eyes once more, there was only one thing left in his mind, not the past, not the confusion, but the future that had just been placed in front of him without warning. Daniel stood there, the noise of the city slowly returning around him, but it no longer felt distant or muted. It felt irrelevant because everything that mattered was now standing just a few feet away. And for the first time in years, he did not have a clear plan. He did not have control over the situation, and that unsettled him more than he expected. He looked at Sophia again, really seeing her not as a memory or a question, but as someone who had carried something enormous on her own. And he realized that whatever anger or confusion he felt, it could not compare to what she must have gone through. "Why did you not try again?" he asked, his voice softer now. Not accusing, but searching for something he could hold on to, and Sophia gave a faint, almost tired smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Because after a while, you stopped knocking on doors that never open," she replied, and there was no bitterness in her tone, only a quiet acceptance that made the words even heavier. Daniel exhaled slowly, his mind replaying what she had said earlier, the visits to his office, the messages that never reached him, and it began to form a realization that felt both sharp and unsettling. Someone had kept them apart, intentionally or not, and that meant the life he had built had been shaped by a lie he never questioned. He ran a hand through his hair again, trying to process it, trying to stay grounded. But then the younger child shifted in Sophia's arms, letting out a small, tired sigh, and that sound pulled him back into the present instantly. He crouched down slightly, lowering himself to their level without thinking, his expensive coat brushing against the cold air as he did. And for a moment, he hesitated, unsure if he should say anything, unsure if he even had the right. But the older child was already watching him closely, waiting. "What are your names?" Daniel asked gently, his voice careful, as if speaking too loudly might break something fragile. The child glanced up at Sophia first, silently asking for permission, and when she gave a small nod, he answered, "Ethan," then pointed to his younger sister, "And that is Lily." And hearing their names felt like something settling into place inside Daniel. Something real and undeniable. "Ethan and Lily," he repeated, them silently, as if committing them to memory, as if making up for lost time in the only way he could in that moment. Sophia watched him carefully, her expression guarded but no longer closed off completely, and Daniel could sense that she was waiting to see what he would do next, not what he would say, but what he would choose. He looked around briefly again, the cold, the passing strangers, the reality of where they were, and something in him shifted from hesitation to certainty. "You cannot. Stay out here," he said, standing back up slowly, his voice calm but firm, and Sophia immediately shook her head, almost instinctively. "Daniel, do not," she said, a quiet warning in her tone, but he did not step back this time. "I am not walking away from this," he replied, meeting her eyes steadily. And for the first time since he had seen her, there was no confusion in his expression, only resolve. Sophia held his gaze for a long moment, as if searching for any sign that he might change his mind, any hint that this was temporary or driven by impulse, but she did not find it. The wind picked up again, brushing past them, and Ethan instinctively moved closer to her side, while Lily remained quietly resting against her, and Daniel felt the weight of that image settle deeply within him. This was no longer about the past being explained. This was about what happened next, about whether he would step into a role he had never known existed. And as he stood there, looking at the three of them, he understood that this moment was not asking for perfect answers. It was asking for a decision, one that would define everything that came after Sophia's refusal came quickly, almost instinctively, as if accepting help was more dangerous than staying where she was, and Daniel could see it clearly now. This was not pride. This was protection, built over years of being let down, of learning not to rely on anything that could disappear. "You do not understand," she said quietly, shaking her head again, her arms tightening slightly around Lily, as if the very idea of change could take something away from her, and Daniel felt a flicker of frustration rise. Not because she was wrong, but because he did understand more than she thought, or at least he was starting to. "Then help me understand," he replied, his voice steady, not pushing too hard, but not stepping back either, and that balance caught her off guard for a moment, because she had expected him to either walk away or take control, not stand there asking to meet her where she was. Ethan watched the exchange closely, his small face serious, and Daniel noticed how protective he seemed, how aware he was of everything happening around him. And it made something inside Daniel shift again, because this child had grown up learning to read situations the way adults do, and that was not something any child should have to carry. "We are fine," Sophia said, but the words felt thinner this time, less certain, and Daniel did not respond immediately. He simply glanced around once more at the cold concrete, at the thin blanket, at the way the wind cut through their space without resistance, and then back at her, letting the reality speak for itself. "This is not fine," he said quietly, not harsh, not judgmental, just honest, and that honesty seemed to land deeper than anything else he had said. Sophia looked away again, her jaw tightening slightly, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might shut down completely, retreat back into silence. But instead, she spoke again, her voice lower now, almost as if she was speaking more to herself than to him. "I cannot risk depending on something that might disappear again," she admitted. And there it was. The truth beneath everything. The fear that had shaped every decision she had made. Daniel felt those words settle heavily because they were not just about the past. They were about him, about the version of him she had been left with. And for the first time, he fully understood that this was not just about offering help. It was about earning trust that had been broken long ago. He took a small breath, steadying himself, and then said, "I am still here, not as a defense, not as an excuse, but as a statement of what he was choosing now, in this moment." Sophia's eyes met his again, searching, questioning, and for a long second, neither of them moved because what she was really deciding was not whether to accept help, but whether to believe that this time would be different. The tension in the air shifted slightly when Lily stirred again, letting out a soft, sleepy sound, and instinctively, Daniel took off his coat without hesitation, stepping forward just enough to gently offer it, not forcing it, just placing it within reach. Sophia hesitated, her gaze moving from the coat to his face, and then to the children, and Daniel could see the internal conflict clearly, the line between survival and trust, between holding on and letting something in. Finally, slowly, she accepted it, wrapping it carefully around Lily first, then adjusting it to cover Ethan as well. And that small action felt bigger than anything that had happened so far, because it was the first time she had allowed him to step into their world, even in the smallest way. Daniel did not say anything, he did not push further, because he understood that this was not a moment for grand gestures. It was a moment for patience, for showing rather than telling. And as he stood there, watching her pull the coat tighter around the children, he realized that this was how it would begin, not with answers, not with explanations, but with small choices, one at a time, building something that had been broken without either of them fully realizing it. Until now, Daniel did not rush the moment after Sophia accepted his coat, because he understood that what had just happened was fragile, something that could easily be undone if he pushed too far, and instead he allowed the silence to settle again. But this time it felt different, not heavy with tension, but filled with something quieter, something closer to possibility. He glanced at Ethan, who was now watching him with a mixture of caution and curiosity, and Daniel offered a small, reassuring nod, the kind that did not demand trust but invited it, and Ethan did not look away this time. "It is getting colder," Daniel said gently after a moment, his voice calm and steady. "There is a place nearby, just a few minutes away, warm, quiet, no pressure. You can leave whenever you want." And he made sure his words carried no sense of control, only an option, because he knew that choice was something Sophia needed more than anything. She hesitated again, but this hesitation was different from before. It was no longer about rejecting him outright. It was about weighing what she had to lose against what she might gain. And Daniel could see that shift clearly. "We do not belong in places like that," she said softly, almost as if reminding herself of a rule she had lived by for too long. And Daniel shook his head slightly, not dismissing her, but reframing the thought. "You belong wherever you decide to stand," he replied, and there was no hesitation in his voice when he said it, because for the first time, he was not speaking from status or success, but from something far more personal. Sophia looked at him. Again, really looked, searching for any sign that this was temporary, that he would walk away once things became complicated. But what she saw instead was consistency, something steady that had not been there before, or maybe had been there all along but had never reached her. Lily shifted again, pressing closer into the warmth of Daniel's coat, and Sophia instinctively adjusted it around her, her movements slower now, more thoughtful. And Daniel realized that she was already beginning to consider what came next. Just for a little while, he added, lowering his voice slightly, for them. And he did not need to explain further, because both of them understood exactly what that meant. Ethan glanced up at Sophia, his expression hopeful but restrained, as if he had learned not to expect too much, and that small, quiet look was enough to tip the balance. Sophia exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction, and then she gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable, but to Daniel, it felt like something significant had just shifted. Only for a little while, she said, and Daniel did not argue, did not expand the moment. He simply accepted it for what it was, because he knew that trust was not built in declarations, it was built in actions that followed. He stepped back slightly, giving her space to gather their things. And as she carefully folded the warm blanket and adjusted the children's positions, Daniel turned and signaled subtly toward his car waiting at the curb. But he did not call attention to it. He did not make it feel like a display of wealth or difference, just a means to get them somewhere warmer. As they began to move, slowly at first, Daniel matched their pace without thinking, staying close enough to guide, but far enough to respect the distance she still needed. And with each step, the distance between their past and their present felt a little less fixed, a little more open to change. And as the city lights reflected softly on the pavement beneath them, Daniel realized that this was no longer about what had been lost. It was about what could still be found. If he chose not to walk away again, the short walk to the car felt longer than it should have. Not because of the distance, but because every step carried the weight of everything that had just changed, and Daniel remained quietly aware of Sophia beside him, of Ethan walking close at her side, and of Lily resting gently against her shoulder, wrapped in his coat, a small but undeniable connection that no longer felt temporary. When they reached the car, Daniel opened the door without saying a word, stepping back to give them space. And for a brief moment, Sophia hesitated again, her eyes scanning the interior, as if trying to reconcile this new environment with the reality she had been living. But then Ethan climbed in first, carefully, almost cautiously, and that single action made the decision for her. Once they were all inside, the warmth of the car settled around them, and for the first time since Daniel had seen her, Sophia allowed herself to exhale fully, her shoulders lowering slightly as the cold no longer pressed against them. Daniel took his place in the front seat, but did not start the car immediately. Instead, he glanced back just long enough to make sure they were comfortable, not as a driver checking passengers, but as someone trying to understand how to exist in this new role without overwhelming it. "It is about 10 minutes, he said gently, keeping his tone neutral, giving them a sense of what to expect, and Sophia gave a small nod, her attention still focused on the children as she adjusted the coat again around Lily, who had already begun to drift into a deeper sleep. As the car began to move, the city lights passed by outside, reflections sliding across the windows, and for a while, no one spoke, but the silence no longer felt strained. It felt like something settling into place. Daniel's mind, however, was anything but quiet, because the pieces were still coming together. The missed messages, the closed doors, the years that had been shaped by something neither of them fully understood. And he knew that this was not the end of the story. It was only the point where the truth had finally started to surface. After a few minutes, Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice careful but curious. "Are we going far?" he asked, and Daniel glanced at him through the mirror, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Not far at all," he replied. "Just somewhere warm where you can rest." And Ethan nodded, seeming to accept that, his posture relaxing just a little. Sophia watched the exchange quietly, her expression thoughtful, and Daniel could sense that she was beginning to see something different in him. Not just the man she once knew, but the man standing in front of her now, making choices in real time, When the car finally slowed and pulled up in front of a quiet building with soft lighting and large windows, Daniel stepped out first, moving around to open the door for them again. And this time, Sophia did not hesitate as long. She stepped out carefully, holding Lily while Ethan followed close behind. The warmth from inside the building was already spilling out toward them, and for a brief moment, Sophia paused at the entrance, her gaze lifting to meet Daniel's once more, and there was something unspoken in that look, something that acknowledged how much had changed in such a short time. Daniel did not rush her, did not fill the silence. He simply stood there, steady and present, allowing her to choose again, and after a second that felt longer than it was, she nodded once more, quieter this time, but more certain. As they stepped inside together, leaving the cold night behind them, Daniel understood that this was not a resolution, not yet, but it was something just as important. It was a beginning, one built not on assumptions or distance, but on truth, choice, and the possibility that even after everything, some connections are never truly lost. They're only waiting to be found again. A powerful emotional journey unfolds in one of the most unforgettable, touching stories, where a successful millionaire unexpectedly encounters a struggling single mother with 2 children on a cold city street, only to realize she is the woman from his past he never truly forgot. This deeply moving narrative explores love, loss, misconnections, and the hidden truths that can change lives forever, making it one of those touching stories that capture the heart from the very first moment. As the millionaire begins to uncover the truth behind her disappearance and the children she has been raising alone, viewers are drawn into a world of emotional tension, quiet resilience, and second chances, defining exactly why touching stories like this resonate so strongly with audiences across America. Through subtle moments of trust, powerful dialogue, and realistic emotional development, the bond between a wealthy man and a once-lost woman slowly begins to rebuild, showing how touching stories can reveal the strength of human connection even after years of separation. This story is not just about reunion, but about uncovering hidden pasts, confronting painful misunderstandings, and choosing compassion over distance, elements that make touching stories timeless and unforgettable. If you are doon toha fanfet na dati vet about zedemtino, family, in unepet junion, DCS one op tostouting study tat we stay with long after it ends vipte, hai tao pom bon mui tu chi mo ta bang chu không sinh hình, nhân vật một. Ba mui chi neo American men, legang sweet, confin et persino, fan fasing, no gaten, no sei, no illustration. Thip lighting, sap di dai, nature fin ton de, hai tao pom bon mui tu chi mo ta bang chu không sinh hình, nhân vật hai, ba mui hai. Year-old white American female, worn clothes, pale face, tired eyes, gentle expression, front-facing, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration, natural lighting, realistic skin texture, emotional presence.